Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a deep dive into Friday's jobs report from the US. And it's a really important piece of data because of two reasons. The Nonfarm Payrolls in the US is one of the yardsticks for the Fed's dual mandates, which is maximum employment. And secondly, today's report could be flashing an early warning sign of a potential recession. And I know the Fed has been in denial about this. I think the narrative has changed from soft landing to no landing. And the labor market weakness has been welcomed by Powell. But I think things may not look as rosy as they do under the hood. And potentially the Fed may have to change their tone soon and start cutting rates in September. So let's begin. Okay, so this is Friday's data. Average earnings up 0.3% month on month. Nonfarm payrolls added 206k net new jobs. Unemployment rate at the same time ticked up another 0.1% to 4.1%. So these are the headlines. And things do look a little bit confusing if you look at this report. We're adding new jobs, but at the same time, unemployment rate is going up. So what is going on? So the first thing I would say is that while the headline numbers, the new jobs added, beat the consensus expectation just narrowly, the report is actually not as strong as it looks because the May and April figures got revised down quite significantly by over 110,000 jobs. So what that means is that the previous blockbuster report in May that beat everyone's expectation was not actually as strong as it looked. It was over-reporting the true figures. So now the revised results for April and May were actually much lower than what we initially thought. And the reason for this is partly statistical. So the non-farm payrolls is done on a survey basis. The businesses get a survey to say how many people they've employed or fired. And the unemployment rate is actually done on a household survey. But a lot of businesses don't actually reply to the surveys in the first go. So the smaller the sample you get initially, the more noise in the sample and the higher margin for error. And just to give you a flavor about just how big the margin for error is. So the BLS estimates that to be in the 90% confidence interval, we are talking about a plus or minus margin of 130,000 jobs, which is a massive gap. Basically, these reports are not that reliable until more data come in over time to confirm the validity. But this creates a problem. The problem is that the Fed is looking, and the markets are looking at those reports, treating them like the gospel each month, right? Because the Fed has to be data dependent. They rely on incoming data to judge whether the monetary policy is too loose or too aggressive. But these data actually have a lot of noise when they first come in, and they keep on getting revised up and down over time. So the evidence that the Fed is using to judge against the monetary policy is subject to significant revisions and time lag. That's not really ideal for real-time decision-making. And the second point is that establishment surveys and household surveys often contradict each other. So in May, the non-farm payrolls rose by 270,000. That's the first estimate, new jobs. But the household surveys suggest people lost more than 400,000 jobs. And the Fed actually treats the establishment data, which is the official non-farm payrolls headline, as the more accurate one because the household surveys come from smaller samples and have more noise. I think you have to be very cautious about the true underlying picture and not just over-rely on one source of report. Now let's talk about unemployment. So unemployment is a measure of how many people are actively seeking for a job and couldn't get one, right? So it doesn't, and that's judged against the participation of labor. So for example, for whatever reason, health reasons, or you have to take care of elders or children at home, you wouldn't actually be counted towards unemployed in this statistic. So what really happened in June was that participation rate actually went up. So more people actually joined the pool of labor looking for jobs. And at the same time, unemployment number also went up. So that translated to a 4.1% unemployment rate. And actually, to be very precise, it's 4.05% unemployment rate that got rounded up. And that's actually an important point, which you will see in a second. Now we have seen in the headlines that the Sahm Rule of Recession has been triggered. So what is the Sahm Rule of Recession? The Sahm Rule states that if the 3-month average of unemployment rate is 0.5% above the 12-month low, then the economy is in a recession already. So if you look at the headline numbers, the past 3-month unemployment rate was 3.9%, 4%, and 4.1%, which gives you an average of 4%, and that is more than 0.5% above the 3.5% unemployment rate observed in July last year. So, is the recession underway? And here comes the nuanced point. The reason that I emphasized that Friday's report was actually an unemployment rate of 4.05% rather than being rounded up to 4.1% is precisely because when you take the 3-month average using this precision, the Sahm rule is actually only 0.43% above the 12-month low. So it's nearly triggered, but not quite. But does it really matter? What we're really saying is that unemployment is really going up against, what it was at the best part of the 12th month. So it's going up in a rapid rate. And if you look at this chart of Sahm rule versus recession, it's been a very reliable predictor. I think there's maybe only 1 year that it didn't come true, but I think 90% of the other recessions were coinciding with this rule of recession. And so the question is, unemployment might actually stick to 4.1% in the coming month, and we're going to trigger this rule formally. Are we in a recession? The Fed doesn't seem to care too much right now. Because only on Tuesday, Powell said he's very pleased with the progress in how the labor market has evolved. The labor market is cooling appropriately, sure, but to judge, and the 4% unemployment rate is still historically low. To judge a 4% unemployment rate versus the 3.4%, 3.5%, very, very extremely tight unemployment rate that you only saw back in the 1960s, is actually not very helpful for monetary policy. It is comparing very good, extremely good versus very good. Now moving on to the third part of the non-farm payrolls, which is the wage earnings. Wages rose by 0.3% month on month, which translates to 3.9% year on year. And this is a slight deceleration from the previous month, where it rose 4.1% year on year, or 0.4% month on month. And that's a good thing. And it's a good thing because high earnings growth puts an upward pressure on services inflation. Not all wage growths can be in productivity gains, and businesses, when they face rising input costs, such as the labor cost, they try to pass it on to the pricing of services and products. And this translates to higher inflation. And we have seen a slowdown in this recently because customers start to trade down in products into cheaper products, and businesses don't feel they can pass on as much pricing cost as they used to. But it's still taking quite a long time for services inflation to slow down. And the Fed is quite keen to observe a slowdown in both earnings and the inflation in the services area. And this is a chart for hourly earnings versus core CPI. And as you can see, they basically move in tandem, except for during COVID. This chart is very important because to put inflation to bed, it's basically suggesting that the hourly earnings growth also has to come back down towards 2%. So what does this mean for rate cuts? On the back of this, the Fed funds futures rallied in the 12 to 24 month period. And what this means is that the yields have come down about 10 to 12 basis points, pricing more of a cut for 2025. The market is really still expecting 2 rate cuts this year in September and December. I know some investment banks are calling for 3, but I personally don't see that unless unemployment rate suddenly spikes to 4.5% or something. And this is not from my opinion. This is actually from what Powell has recently said and what a series of other Fed speakers have said only recently, right? So the Fed generally feels they can't afford to wait for the rate cuts. They want to absorb more incoming inflation data to make sure inflation doesn't come back once they cut rates. Because if they cut rates, inflation comes back and they have to hike rates again, they will have to unnecessarily hurt the economy. So they rather get the job done properly now than have to do a yo-yo down the line. Powell hasn't really said anything about July, September or November cuts. But the market is reading it that way, and Powell hasn't really pushed back either. So I think it really does depend on the incoming inflation data, the CPI, the PCE in the next 3 months. As long as the labor market loosens up slightly without a huge spike in the unemployment rate, I think the Fed will be content to not cut at least until September. So that's it for today. If you haven't got any questions, please leave in the comments. If you like today's video, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate your support. Thank you.